Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Bill Brenner, VP of Custom Content at Cyber Risk Alliance, and I want to welcome you all to this SC Media In Focus, sponsored by Fortinet. Joining me today from Fortinet is Derek Manky, Chief Security Strategist and VP of Global Threat Intelligence for Fortinet's FortiGuard Labs. We're going to discuss 2023 and some threat landscape trends. And with that, Derek, how are you?
I'm doing well, Bill. Doing well. Never a boring day, as we always say, and today's no exception.
Yep. So, I typically have scripted questions. That's how we do it here in the media profession. But one thing occurred to me right before recording. So I want to start the conversation with this, and that is that all of the predictions, all of the surveys that are being circulated right now, I'm willing to bet that not many of those surveys are really accounting for the choppy economic times that we find ourselves entering. I know that for our part, Cyber Risk Alliance Business Intelligence, we do monthly studies, surveys, and in almost any of them, whether we're talking about cloud security or app security or ransomware, email security, the answer is almost always that they're planning more spending on technology to help deal with the given topic in the next 2 years. And so I look at that and I'm like, I'm wondering, over the last couple of weeks, the economic choppiness has come into clearer view. How do you think in 2023 this may affect organizations' ability to have the security that they need? Do you think that investments that were planned may now dry up? Do you think that because security is so vital that it's going to be unaffected? What's your early thinking there?
Yeah, great question. I think they can't afford not to, quite frankly. If you look at what's been happening with the collateral damage that's been happening from attacks, it's rising. It's not falling, it's rising, right? I mean, there's reports out there. You've seen average cost of a data breach, time to detect these threats and respond. That's the problem hasn't gotten any better. It's in fact unfortunately, I know we talk about the bad things all the time or too often, but it's actually gotten a bit worse. And so I think that security posture, everything from the training aspects and cyber hygiene to fabric implementations, right? Having that security posture that needs to definitely ramp up, because if you look at spending up front on this compared to the collateral damage, again, we're not talking about thousands of dollars or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. We're talking about USD millions of dollars, right? 5 million plus average cost of data breaches that are happening. That's a lot of money. And these targeted ransom demands that are happening as well too. Like the risks are much higher. It's happening. Obviously, we talk about security being elevated to a board conversation more and more. That's definitely happening now and there. And so, to going back to your question, do I think this is going to put a halt to it? I don't. Just because this is definitely front of mind now. There's been already a lot of examples of this happening, and these are baseline trends. It's not just going to drop off the charts next year, right? I expect that just to keep happening. And as you know, cyber criminals are opportunistic, and what better time than now if you look at the economic uncertainty. So they're not going to lay off the gas either.
So your bet is on those in the security profession and the technology they must invest in remaining steady out of necessity.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Got it. Okay, time will tell. Let's widen the aperture a little bit in terms of trends. What do you, as you look at 2023, 2022 has been the year of, the year of living dangerously for security teams, between ransomware and third party and supply chain vulnerabilities. So it's easy to think that that's going to continue as we go into 2023, but do you see anything in particular that bears watching?
Yeah, so if I look at what's coming down the pipe next year in 2023, this isn't the gazing into the crystal ball and trying to create up some wild imagination. Of course, this is based off of years of following threat landscape, knowing what cyber criminals think like, and obviously existing trends that we've seen. So like you mentioned, existing problems, supply chain attacks, attacks on OT networks as an example, these sort of converged networks between IT and OT, these things we've already seen some indicators of. What I expect to happen is that this is going to ramp up more at scale. Like if I were to sum this up into, a couple snackable words, I would say calculated, targeted, destructive, and at scale. And that sounds very scary, but the idea here is we've seen APT style attacks, right? Nation state attacks focused on low and slow, one or two targets by design, right? Doing that reconnaissance weaponization phase, creating not ransomware, but things like data wipers, things that actually impact systems because it's designed for those sort of targeted attacks, typically against OT environments or public sector. But then, what I'm starting to see now is this effect between APT nation state actors and cybercrime actors actually working together, right? I mean, I call it advanced persistent cybercrime, but it's actually their playbooks and, reliance of infrastructure and the commoditization of things that were used in these one-to-one attacks now being more widespread. We've actually seen this at FortiGuard Labs. I've seen data wipers now, not just, we saw 7 new wipers that started in Ukraine in the first half of this year that we're actually seeing in over 24 countries now, detections of those same wipers in IT environments, being targeted at IT environments, right? So it's happening at much more scale now, and I expect that to definitely ramp up. And again, we're not talking about one-to-one attacks, but one-to-many and targeted, right? I think that's what we're going to see, is not this more of these like spray and pray or blanketed attacks that are happening from cyber criminals that we've seen in the past. Of course, that'll happen still through spam botnets and all of that, but much more targeted attacks going after high net worth individuals, after high valued assets, right, in organizations. That's what I see coming forward.
Got it. And now, talk to me about what the convergence of the threat landscape means for cyber defenders.
Yeah, so OT and IT is a good example. We saw that in the past, going back to those examples of Colonial and JBS and all of that, right? IT networks that are impacted that directly, in fact, impact manufacturing, impact production environments in OT as an example. That's a network convergence effect that's happening out there. But if you think of defenders, right, I talked about that convergence that's happening on the threat landscape. What that means is that cyber criminals are now focused on more of that left side of. So if we look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, or the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, the oldie but goodie, they're focused more on that left, meaning reconnaissance, weaponization of threat, right? So what does that mean for defenders is that now they have to be putting more focus. We've already talked a lot about ramping up, shoring up efforts, of attacks that are in motion, right? Trying to stop lateral
Mhm.
movement, doing segmentation, doing incident response, all of that. That's all good, and that needs to happen. There's been a lot of focus on that, but the pregame, right, looking at that reconnaissance and weaponization phase, that's a lot trickier to do. But it's becoming more relevant, and that's really what it means to defenders, is putting more focus now onto this pre-attack game.
Yep. So let's talk a bit. You and I in previous In Focus episodes, we've talked about cybercrime as a service, and you kind of started alluding to it here. Talk about how you think in 2023, cybercrime as a service could enable more destructive attacks at scale.
Yeah, so there's a direct relationship here with cybercrime as a service. It's the affiliate model. So if you look at how ransom as a service, which has been prolific, is positioned, it's not just, it's the organization or the mothership, as we call it, that's feeding all these business partners. And in fact, there's typically 50 to 100 plus affiliates just in one network. So right there, that shows you how even just with ransomware, they've been successful at doing these attacks at scale, right? Because they do commission cuts. Each affiliate has a different method of how they will try to launch an attack, and it scales out. What I think with the crime as a service, what crime as a service portfolios are going to expand next year, right? Because they've already been doing this game. It's sort of like proof of concept environments, right? They've done it with ransom as a service. Now that they are focusing more on, again, targeted attacks, doing extortion, double extortion techniques, doing reconnaissance as well, I expect that to be added into their portfolio, right? So look out for crime services like reconnaissance as a service, like money laundering as a service as well too, right? There's a lot of that happening, washing funds through crypto exchanges and all this. Things are already doing that. Hey, they can turn this into another revenue stream and model, right? And unfortunately, by doing that, that's going to open up the door to more attackers leveraging that, and that's where we're going to see that really act as a catalyst to launch these more destructive attacks at scale. Because again, they're going to be the ordinary. Well, I wouldn't say ordinary, but the up and coming attacker, right, that goes and tries to launch a targeted attack. If they have a reconnaissance as a service, offering at hand, they can get a lot more dirt on their target, launch a more effective attack.
Yep. Cybercrime Incorporated. It's like corporations, they may as well have their own HR departments, legal teams.
Yeah, well, they do. I mean, they have recruiters, so you can effectively call that HR.
Yep. So what are three things, if you're a cyber defender, three things to consider in your security portfolios to protect against what we see coming in 2023?
All right, I'll try to simplify this. I would say the first would be ramping up automation, some layers of machine learning and AI. And that's a big buzzword when you talk about AI, but I'm talking about being able to respond to these attacks at scale, to deal with that in motion. That still has to be done, right? But that shouldn't be done 100% with humans, right? Because you're trying to actually, monitor the threat landscape, respond to it. That can be done through SOAR, as an example, SD-WAN, automation. That SOC piece needs to be in place, right? Because that takes care of the day-to-day. On top of that, what I would say is, again, moving to that, what does this mean for defenders on the left, focusing on next generation SOC type solutions, right? So things like deception is one of my favorite, right? Being able to effectively put decoys or lures into your network. So while attackers come poking around, trying to blueprint, on that reconnaissance phase, trying to blueprint your network, look at things they can effectively fall into these, what we call honeypots on steroids, right? Because they're actually going into lure environments. You can monitor them, trap them, so they're not actually hitting production assets and finding out things that they can use to launch an attack. It also deters them, right? It's a path of least resistance. If they're walking into traps on your network, they're alarm bells are going to be going off, and they're likely going to go to another target. Also, things like knowing your enemy, so DRPS, so digital risk protection services, knowing if attackers are actually looking at your credentials, talking about you on dark web and forums. That sort of threat intelligence is really useful to know as well.
Excellent. Well, time will tell, but I always enjoy getting together with you and talking about this, and I look forward to the next one. And so in the meantime, thank you to Fortinet for sponsoring this webcast. Thanks to you, Derek, and thanks to those who will be joining us.
Thanks for your time. It's always great talking to you, Bill.